Hello, everyone. Thrilled to have you here. Good afternoon. My name is Ulrich Boser. I'm the CEO of the Learning Agency, and thank you so much for joining us for our conversation with Anya Kamenetz on her new book, The Art of Screen Time. Also joining us is Helen Bouygues. She's the founder of the Reboot Foundation, which aims to advance critical thinking, education, and research. Just a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to Helen. We're going to reserve the last 15 minutes of this event today to answer questions. So the Q&A chat is open at the bottom of your Zoom window. Just throw questions in there, questions for Anya, for Helen, just post it in there. We'll make sure to get them to her. Also wanted to make sure that you knew that we are recording this event. It'll be on the Learning Agency website. So as you are in front of a screen today watching this and you need to jump away, you'll have a recording. And then finally, we will be giving away 20 free books. You'll get an email if you are one of the lucky ones tomorrow. Otherwise, of course, you can get Anya's book wherever books are sold. And now enough from me. I'm going to turn it over to Helen and Anya. Helen?
Thanks, Ulrich. Thanks for organizing this event today and for obviously inviting the Reboot Foundation to participate. I am absolutely thrilled to talk with Anya today. She is a well-known author and correspondent at NPR, where she has covered education since 2014. Her reporting has won a 2017 Edward R. Monroe Award for Innovation and a 2015 National Award for Education Reporting for her Grad Rates project. Anya also co-hosts NPR's Life Kit Parenting podcast and The Art of Screen Time, and it's Anya's fourth book. And I'm sure we'll have to save some time for her to talk about her fifth book at the end of this discussion. Anya is clearly a prolific writer and thinker, and she has also contributed to the New York Times, the Washington Post, New York Magazine, and Slate. And we're absolutely thrilled to have her join us today. Anya, your book is incredibly timely, with so many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of children being forced to learn online due to the coronavirus pandemic. Well, first of all, let me ask you a personal question. I believe you have two children. Are they actually physically in schools, or are they currently being schooled online from home?
My 4-year-old is in person preschool, and her school has a Department of Health license as a childcare. So far so good. Keeping our prayer out for the positivity rate here in New York City. My older daughter is on online school, 4th grade from home. So that's our divide.
Okay, thanks. I mean, well, COVID has actually only recently ushered a new age of remote learning and reliance on screens. You've really been examining the relationship between screen time and children for a few years now. So in addition to, having children, I mean, how is it that you became interested in this topic? Because it obviously precedes even what we're actually living through right now.
Yeah, so I have been writing about education since I first got started in journalism. My first book was all about student loan debt and kind of the millennial generation. And that got me started on a career of really examining education from a student perspective, from a learner perspective, which is not the norm in education. I think the majority of scholarship and examination of this endeavor comes from the educator's point of view, and the educator's point of view is very important. But students are the ones who have to go through all of that learning, and so I think it's really a good idea to look at their perspective. Now, my work in that area, kind of going around talking on college campuses and writing about higher ed, coincided with this revolution in really fast broadband and high quality video, which precipitated the MOOC revolution. So I actually had a book that came out in 2010, right before the first really large scale MOOC at Stanford, which is Stanford AI, which led to the founding of Udacity and Coursera, and then edX at MIT, and kind of this whole big explosion of excitement in the idea that you could put college online for free to anyone, anywhere. And I really was in the center of a lot of fascinating conversations amongst people about what is the web for, who builds it, what kind of learners are served by the old education system, what kind of learners could we serve in the new education system. There were a lot of people bringing in really progressive ideas that were not new at all. They were decades old, progressive, learner-centered, passion-driven education, self-directed education, and then porting that into the web space and saying, well, we could have peer-to-peer learning, anybody can become an expert in anything. We're going to flatten the playing field, and and none of those things really came to be in exactly the way that they had been envisioned. The power structures of education and of society, credentialism, stop that revolution from happening in the way people envisioned. But I think that a lot of the same conversation is still going on, in the sense that we know that there are ways for some people to learn some things differently, maybe better, with the free resources that can come through the web. We just haven't figured out how to use that insight to lower inequities or close the achievement gap or the opportunity gap, or now, what we're witnessing in real time is the failure of remote learning to actually account for the losses that are happening when school doors are closed. It's just not working in the way that people had hoped that it would.
Yeah, I mean, and it's probably even worse than that, because while some people may say that we've democratized information, we've also created a bit of a monster where people can't differentiate between blogs and institutional sources, and this whole phenomenon of disinformation and misinformation, which you actually allude to in your book as well.
Yes.
And as you know, the Reboot Foundation, that's a little bit of our obsession about, concerns about that. But let me ask you a whole bunch of questions that are around your book, because it's obviously a very fascinating book. The research landscape on kids and screen time actually is remarkably thin. And it's what's written is actually more around television even. Mm-hmm. And so even the most cited guidelines out there, such as the American Academy of Pediatrics, isn't based on a whole lot of evidence. So as you were conducting your research, did you actually find that surprising?
Oh yeah. I mean, my number one question was, what is this doing to our kids' brains? And there was almost nobody who could answer it. I mean, I had Victor Strasburger, who drafted the famous American Academy of Pediatrics no screens before age 2 rule. This is the guy that wrote the rule, tells me flat out, we made it up. We had no evidence behind it. And then he goes on to say, well, but it turned out we were right, because, this and that study came out afterwards. But actually, they changed that recommendation based on very small studies that showed that maybe video chat is okay, even for babies, and synchronous communication online is not the same thing as consumption of videos. So there's a lot of concerns. I mean, some of this is a structural issue, right? If you suspect that screen time is harming small children, you're not going to expose them to it differentially, and certainly not in an experimental setting. So even some of the classic studies about violence in media go back to the 1950s. There's a famous Bobo the Clown study, right, where the children watch a video of someone beating up a clown puppet, and then they're given the opportunity to do the same thing, and they also beat up a clown puppet. You probably couldn't do that study today. There would be some concerns around showing kids violent, clown on clown violence. So we're left with a very old evidence base and a lot of allegations and worries. There's been some brain-based studies. There's been an innovation in sort of non-invasive MRI scanning. There's a really big study going on right now called the ABCD study, which is studying huge numbers of different aspects of development in children and adolescents. There's some data coming out of that. It'll be years before the study is complete. So we're kind of going on a real mishmash when it comes to the scientific basis. And I think people should keep that in mind when they're trying to make informed decisions. Your informed decision is only good as the data that's used to inform it.
And are there any research or resources in this quagmire where it's hard to find that you think is more useful, in addition to reading your book, that you would recommend people?
I mean, I consult the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm in touch with them regularly. I think that they're trying to make clinical recommendations based on, that doctors can use in their practice. And doctors know patients. And in the absence of very fine-grained data about, the Nintendo Switch versus the PS2, you can fall back on a pretty generalized clinical assessment of, how is this kid doing? Is this kid thriving? Is this kid suffering, struggling? And so I often in my presentations, I put forth the problematic media use measure, PMUM scale, which is adapted from actually behavioral addictions like gambling addiction. And it talks about a child's emotional attachment to screen time. And what you're looking for is like, has interest in other activities been pruned away? Is this child losing sleep? Are they giving up on outdoor time? Do they not relate to their family members or friends? And screens are just consuming everything. So I think there's some pretty common sense measures that you can look at kind of from the outside and get by even without this very fine-grained information that we'd all love to have.
Yeah. One of the things that you allude to in your book is class issues at play, lower income and working mothers potentially being more reliant on screens to divert or babysit kids.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk with parents, was there indeed a difference in how parents of different socioeconomic classes viewed screen time?
There's a lot of interesting research on this point, and some of it points out that families that have fewer devices have more co-viewing time, which is something that can actually be the basis of family bonding. And particularly in situations like we've had with the pandemic, if they're spending more time at home together because they're working fewer hours, they might have more chances for positive conversations around the screen, which we know is kind of key to healthy use. We also have seen that Spanish-speaking families in the US have a more positive disposition generally towards media use because they see it as that my kids are going to learn English and they're going to learn some cultural capital that they might need. So, there's really interesting variations here, and obviously it's not monolithic. I think that there's also differences in kind of the internal aspiration of parents. So, aspiring to limit screen time is something that it's seen that parents, upper middle class parents do, right? They limit screen time is like having organic food, or it's like having, teaching your kid a foreign language is something that the parents do. So it could be that aspirational parents kind of want to limit screen time or talk more about limiting screen time than other families do. So it can be kind of a cultural marker in that way, different from class, kind of more like, and I did interview parents who were, saw themselves as upwardly mobile, and limiting media was part of that.
Well, I guess it's kind of easy for people to think that way when, there's the anecdote that Steve Jobs didn't allow his children to actually have any access to Apple products, right? So there is a bit of that relationship, I guess, as well.
Yeah.
I guess kind of linked to that question, for all the talk about phones, tablets, and laptops, et cetera, still keeping in mind that the historical research has, especially around screen time, has been around TV.
Yeah.
I admit in our home, my husband seems to be a collector of TVs, but since we don't have cable in France, nobody actually watches any of it. And it's more a monolith that seems to sit in rooms. But do you actually believe that the studies around TV is directly transferable to tablets and iPhone usage?
Oh, no, definitely not. I think that I kind of mentioned this in the pre-conversation, but every device with its form factor, the type of programming that's on it, is going to have a different, play a different role in sort of the social setting of the home and then outside the home. So one of the biggest differences between mobile devices and televisions is you carry them with you everywhere, right? So, and this was maybe more salient when we were leaving our houses more often, but they have the potential to kind of fill in a lot of little interactions that might normally be happening between parents and kids, whether that's, when they're driving in the car, or, the parent is at the side by the playground and the kid is playing and the parent's on the phone. So, it's not just the child use the device, but it's also the parents use the device that interferes. And then, the television intrudes into the shared space. And some studies have shown that one consequence of that is a big drop in parent-child communication when the television is kind of blaring in the background. So one important thing to know is that there's no such thing as background TV. It's in there, it's like secondhand smoke, it's going to drop the quality of your interactions. And that's really bad for kids when they're learning language. It's also bad for adults and kids in terms of the emotional intelligence of how they interact, because they're not paying as much attention to each other. phones can obviously play the same role there. So you're looking at your phone, you're distracted, you're not responding as skillfully as a parent to your kid. And the same thing with your kids. They're looking at the phone, not at you. They're not listening, and they're not, engaging in the back and forth that they need for their development. So phones coming with you everywhere and being very personal are two kind of the most important reasons that they're different from TV. And then of course they have the interaction design, right? The notifications and the personalization of, the potential reward and doing things that television just can't do in terms of keeping you going on the device a very long time.
Yeah, and obviously the whole dimension of instant gratification aspect as well, in terms of how we, kind of going back to Daniel Kahneman's, philosophy of slow thinking versus fast thinking as well. Clearly, I guess, well, cable may be different because you can probably keep changing the channel and whatnot, but in theory, in TV, you kind of receive what's being shown, right? Rather than trying to click through and address matters. Let's change a little bit about, again, the actual impact. Your book mentions impaired sleep, obesity, aggressions as some of the more correlated negative outcomes with screens.
Mm-hmm.
But it's true that we talk a lot more about the sleep issue. When you talk with parents, are these the side effects that people are worried about most, or are there other things that are on the minds of parents?
I wouldn't say they're the things that people bring up the most. I think that the things that people bring up the most have to do with kind of a symbolic gatekeeping, that they're worried about different kinds of dangers coming into the child's life that the parent's not controlling. So we're talking about things like revenge porn or sexting or porn in general, cyberbullying, misinformation, disinformation, even radicalization. And so these are things that are going to come into my child's brain kind of unimpeded. I'm talking about for slightly older kids. Now, younger kids, maybe more like addiction, their brain development issues. My child seems very attached to the phone or the computer, and I'm having trouble kind of dealing with the fact that they're using it as an emotional support object. So I think that the key kind of principle to keep in mind here from the literature is that it's the dandelions versus orchids idea. In other words, like easy kids are easy and hard kids are tough. So most of our kids are averagely resilient and fine and resilient to lots of things and will be fine with an average amount of screens. And then there are kids with coexisting issues. Autism spectrum is often mentioned, ADHD is often mentioned, anxiety and depression. And when those things exist, or just sensory issues generally, like short of the autism spectrum, but kids that have trouble tuning out distractions, sensitive to noise, when those things exist, screen time can have a bigger impact. It can be more of a detriment, more of a distraction. It can harm kids. So you kind of have to look at the bigger picture. And I'll say, like anecdotally, there are, these residential facilities for treatment of screen addiction. And from my conversations with folks that run those things, almost every single kid who shows up there has a co-occurring issue. So a lot of the kids who are showing up there are on the autism spectrum, or they have ADHD, or they have anxiety, depression, or they have all of the above.
So let's talk about the case of dandelions then. What I appreciate in your book is that you're not dogmatic. You're pretty practical about how to manage, about the time. But what is your position? How many hours do you think really should be the limit per day? And if that is different for our younger children versus our older children?
Yeah, I like to answer this question by going backwards and saying, how much sleep does your kid need? Mm-hmm. How much time do they have to spend on schoolwork? What other thing, can they get outside each and every day, move their bodies? Can they have screen-free meals? Once you create that structure of your day, then you can start to talk about how are they going to divide up the leisure hours that are different. And the other thing is that, kids like grown-ups respond to the notion of different rules for different contexts. So you can have a movie night, or you can have vacation rules, or, you know, other types of holiday rules that don't fit into your everyday, and kids are totally fine with that. They understand that. So that's, I mean, that's a roundabout way of answering, but I really do believe that it's important to not, because you could have a kid who's 15 minutes a day and they're spending those 15 minutes on Stormfront, like messaging with Nazis. Like, I mean, that's probably unlikely, but it could happen. So you can have a very poor use of a very short amount of time. Or there's the paradigmatic kid who's learning to code and making video games, and, you know, or connecting with, you know, friends from around the world, or doing other kinds of incredibly positive things, and they're doing it for hours and hours.
So let me ask you a personal question then. You mentioned the need for adults to kind of set examples for your children and be cognizant of your own actual screen time. So what is your average own screen time?
Oh my God. I mean, it's a lot, you know. I'm on Twitter for work. I'm doing docs. I'm on social media a lot now because my friends are all over, you know, I can't see people in person. So the things that I really try to adhere to is I don't have my phone in my bedroom at night. I try not to pick it up in the morning until I've gotten through the kids' breakfast. And same thing with no phones at the table at dinner. We're pretty good about that. And, you know, bedtime, when I put my younger daughter to bed, I try to keep the phone away, out of sight. So it's more about when I don't have the phone than when I do.
So for those of you who haven't read the book, there's actually a practical checklist of what to try to avoid.
Yeah.
For me personally, I found not checking your phone when you wake up actually the hardest in your checklist. And especially with the recent elections, me being 6 hours ahead in Paris,
Right.
it was almost the first thing that I was focused on. But you know, it's a great point, and obviously they're not easy even for adults to follow necessarily.
Yeah.
In your book, Anya, you talk about a child psychologist who is extremely anti-screen, and she prescribes for her clients 4 weeks of digital detox. What is that, and do you think it's actually effective?
So I think it's 6 weeks, actually, Victoria.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
And so keep in mind that she treats extremely serious patients. Her kids are usually, you know, traumatized. They have some form of, you know, organic brain issue, or something they've been diagnosed with multiple kind of syndromes. But, you know, basically the idea is that you really rip off the Band-Aid and you go cold turkey for several weeks, and you're trying to reset your habits and your behaviors, and that the kids get used to. I mean, I think that the core insight that she has from her work, which I think is very valid, is that screens are actually quite stimulating. And that's paradoxical, because we think of them as being pacifying or tranquilizing. But in fact, they are blaring at you. They are telling you things. They're making you feel certain things. And you're physically not responding while you're watching. And so this stimulation is happening and there's no discharge for it. And so what she found again and again in her patients was that you turn off the screen and you have an explosive reaction, which is basically the expression of this stimulation that went into your, like, there's a disequilibrium in the kids. I don't want to mystify it too much. I mean, their hearts are racing, like they're excited about something, they're angry, they're scared, they're upset, they're happy, and they haven't been moving around, and kids really need to move around. So turning that off, dialing it down, having less stimulation can be really helpful for a kid who's having trouble managing these surges of emotion. And I think there's other ways of doing the same thing. So getting out of range of your devices for a period of time is a great thing to try if you feel like they're controlling you and you're not controlling them, and you can feel like you can get over the initial resistance that's going to necessarily occur, you know, if you try to take the screens away. But I also kind of recommend that parents look for ways to kind of complete that stress cycle. So make sure that you build in some letting off steam time to counteract the effects of just sitting and absorbing the screens for such a long time.
So I'm going to actually go to one of the questions because it's along the same vein. It's a question that came up. I'm interested to hear what sort of screen time rules Anya has in her home with her children. Could you, I mean, so you mentioned you have a 4-year-old and I believe 11-year-old.
Right. So this is going to be really different. So the one thing that we've done with both our kids since they were little is that all bets are off on Saturdays. We don't give them a lot of, Saturdays are the only time that they both are allowed to watch consumption videos for as much as they want, really. They can watch movies, they can watch TV. My older daughter's very into YouTube now, so she has certain YouTubers she likes to watch. Now, on that day, we still eat meals at the table, and we still go outside and play for part of the day, and we still have time that we interact as a family, but they really get a time to like soak and do whatever they want. The rest of the time, COVID has changed, softened things up a little bit. So with my younger daughter, that is the bulk of her screen time, is on Saturdays. During the week, we're allowing her to use audiobooks, which is something that she really likes to do on the iPad. And then while she does that, she'll color with a coloring app, which is a little bit creative, but it's not very gamified. So that's good. It's like, just, it's satisfying without having a lot of game mechanics in it. And then the older one, we have really allowed her to play games online to the extent that she's with her friends live doing it, and usually on a Zoom while she's doing it. And we kind of think of that as it's more like social time than it is like just video gaming. We're not so into her just playing video games by itself. And those are the rules, except when, we have no childcare because our nanny is quarantining or some other wrinkle has happened, and we'll make an exception for this or that. But that's our general structure, and it's been going pretty well.
Thanks, Anya. You also talk in your book about positive digital parenting. So could you describe a little bit more what you mean by that?
In the general discourse, there has been a real disservice to parents in the sense that we are often told that good parents say no to screen time. And we are not given a lot of coaching or feedback on how to say yes and how to say it yes well. Because if you think about the role of digital technology in our lives, we're all using it all the time, and we're using it for a vast variety of functions. And some of them are extremely positive and bring huge amounts of benefit to our lives, like this conversation we're having right now, right? It enables us to do our work, to learn, to be creative, to connect with other people, follow our passions, and also just enjoy some cultural thing that you like to do. I mean, movies, music, these are not, they're not morally bad, right? They're good things. So how do we share those benefits with our kids? How do we model for them what it means to have positive interactions online and to use it for learning and for creativity? The same way that we parent them through other types of things, other types of opportunities. You model, you talk about the benefit, you ask questions about their interests and let their interests guide you. And you make your values known. So there's a lot of research on the positive benefits of mediation of media, which means not turning it off, but talking about what's on the screen. And that can be anything from, why do these female superheroes need to wear such tight outfits, do you think? Or, it's interesting that the rich people are the good guys in this story and the poor people are the bad guys, or vice versa. Or what do you think about that? Or what about this portrayal of this culture? So you can always use anything that you're watching or that they're watching as a springboard. And rather than kind of say, that's bad, I don't like it, you should turn it off, which is going to be less and less effective as they get older, prompting those questions and helping them internalize potentially a little bit is shown to be much more effective. And, I can't emphasize enough that our kids need to hear from us that the things that they like and think are cool are worthwhile and that they are worthy of our respect. There's so much that is alien and such a gap in the culture between, even between Facebook and TikTok, right? Or whatever the network is next that we don't even know what it is. We're going to have to listen to our kids. We're going to have to ask them questions because we want to establish that pattern of them talking to us about their lives, including their digital lives.
Could we switch and talk a little bit about, we talked a lot about screen time and actually the application, the hardware. But can we talk a little bit about impact of social media? And because that's obviously a slightly different dimension. I just wanted to understand kind of your thoughts around that.
Yeah. Yeah, I find it extremely interesting. I find it to be a very compelling argument that a lot of the problems on social media occur because we don't have a really strong cultural conversation about what is and is not acceptable on social media. So it's a little bit of a Lord of the Flies situation. And we throw our kids onto it at the age of 13 or 14. We don't give them any feedback about how to act. We shouldn't be surprised when they're mean, they're superficial, they're silly, they're silly. And so I think an interesting way of thinking about a remedy for that is to model interactions on social media and actually to give our kids a little bit of a nudge to look over our shoulders and talk about how we share and how we comment and how we talk online. So Stacy Steinberg, who's a University of Florida law professor, has a book out about sharenting. And she talks about, from the time that her kids were very young and from the time my older daughter was 4 years old, I would ask her before I put up a photo of her online. So I'm modeling that you get permission. And then I would talk with her about the comments and the feedback that I got. So, whether that's an auntie or a friend who's far away, and helping people see that what we do is we use social media to stay in touch with people, to have conversations. And then as your kids get older and they're having their own conversations online, just talking to them about them and helping them understand, that a conversation online is hard because, first of all, you don't always know who you're talking to. You need to make sure you know who you're talking to, what the privacy settings are. You need to understand that it's a lot easier to say certain things when it's not to someone's face. But we should all strive to be kind of honorable in our conversations and say things in safe space, that you should know when to take a conversation offline, into real life, into video chat, if you can't talk in real life. And so model this behavior. And so it's in a roundabout way, it's an argument for getting our kids online younger, when we have more influence, rather than when they're older teens and they have, a really good reason to say, you should butt out.
So there's some questions out there that get a little bit more personal about the social media. So I'm actually going to go ahead and ask them to you, Anya.
Yeah.
There's somebody in the audience who said, I have a son who has a hard time making in real life social connections, but he's made a lot of relationships with peers online. Do these online relationships count? Are they as authentic as real life social interactions?
I really feel the concern behind this question. And I don't think we have any objective way to measure the quality of a relationship. I just think that relationships are based on mutual support and understanding of people. And, ideally you can be in person with your friends, but I think that there's a lot of potential for very satisfying relationships that are formed online, and especially for kids with specific interests or with limitations that make it hard for them to socialize in person. I would say lean into this and support your son in thinking for himself about what a satisfying friendship means. How can he show up for these people that he's met online in ways that feel real to him, and and hopefully build skills that will be there for him as he gets older and is able to form different kinds of relationships.
So another question about social media from the audience. How do you balance wanting to keep children off social media / community gaming while also keeping them from feeling left out when all of their friends are communicating that way? It's a slightly different type of question, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so we are in this situation, right, where a lot of kids, tweens, are connecting on platforms like Roblox and Minecraft and Among Us now. And, I'll show my hand to say that I'm okay with it, in the sense that it's happening in a situation where I can kind of eavesdrop and overhear what my daughter's doing. If she seems like she's getting upset at someone or someone's acting mean, I can talk to her about that and how she feels about it. And so it doesn't feel all that different to me than a conversation with friends in a play date that I would have hosted in pre-COVID times. And I think that's appropriate. So if there's specific fears, if there's specific things that have been happening in this parent's community, I would encourage them to address it and talk to their kids about it as well. About what would you do if you met a bully, or if someone says something to you that you don't like. Do you have a way of do you have a response prepared? Are you ready to kind of shift a conversation, or do you know when to leave a conversation? But it's really important right now, specifically in these times of COVID, where kids can't always get together safely with their friends and they are meeting online, that I think it's important that they have the social outlet, and that, you know, it's incumbent upon us as parents to figure out what level of that we're really comfortable with.
Yeah. So there was another question. I think you more or less answered the question, which was from the audience. How do you feel about the use of social media controlling older children's self-esteem in middle school and high school? And I think you all already alluded to the fact that it's important to start communicating and having that conversation about their self-esteem outside of the social media forum. But I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that question.
I think that younger teens and older teens are self-aware enough to understand arguments and conversations about how social media is manipulative and how people can present, you know, don't compare your insides to other people's outsides, you know, just looking for themselves through people's feeds and looking at the difference between maybe what was happening in my life and what I presented in a picture, I think can be helpful. Also helping kids to find, you know, there's a really interesting study that came out about teens' use of social media, and it found that teens with self-described mental health issues, anxiety, depression, they use social media differently. A lot of times they were using it to seek out information about wellness or information about kids who were going through similar experiences. And so, you know, there can be a world of difference between myself feeling like maybe I'm having a body image day, right? And I go online and I see a model influencer on the coast of Ibiza, right? And I feel horrible. Or maybe I'm following someone who's a body positivity coach and they're posting something about, like, you know, eat something that makes you feel good or do something that makes you feel good in your body today. And then I feel great. I close the app and I feel great. You know, so a lot of it has to do with what we follow, who we follow, and how we follow them. So, you know, I think you can kind of zero in on that rather than saying social media is going to have a binary effect on my daughter's or my son's self-esteem.
Yeah, so you kind of refer that as parents in your book by the term mom baiting. So I'm actually not going to disclose what you mean by it so that the people in this audience will actually read the book if they haven't. So I'm going to leave that as a cliffhanger. But I'm going to challenge you a little bit, Anya, about what you said about it's okay to expose children earlier for social media, et cetera. Because, and as you know, Reboot Foundation, we've done a lot of articles and studies around the problems with social media. And it goes back to the subject that you addressed in your book about disinformation and misinformation. Yep. You know, social media is constructed to basically play with people's emotions to try to get click-throughs. Yep. And frankly, unfortunately, even 90% of adults today gather news source not directly from NPR, but via social media. And so there's this natural tendency, especially when you talk about culture, biases, political, or just things that are by definition emotion. Just watch this election. You know, we really do get into a tunnel, even us as adults, let alone children who perhaps, I mean, you know, we should give them credit, but if we can't even manage our own emotions via the social media tunnel because the way it's structured, how confident are we that children who are even less exposed really have the arms to fight against that? So, you know, I think that is worthy of a debate. I think, you know, I heard you loud and clear. You need to have that discussion, and children are intelligent enough and, more importantly, self-aware enough that they can absorb and understand when we explain to them how do these social media companies make money, and hence what is the actual logic behind it. But at the same time, no matter how much metacognition we do, you know, thinking about the way we think and actually the original objectives of these social media, it's very easy for us to be trapped, right? I mean, even us adults are. So I just want to hear some of your thoughts around it.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. And I think that it sort of speaks to the limitations of what I'm doing, which is writing a parenting advice book. You know, the issues that you're talking about are structural, and they are economic. They have to do with incentives, and they have to do with the lack of regulation. And, you know, a lack of real oversight from lawmaking bodies that don't look at, that have really abdicated their responsibility to regulate technology the way that other kinds of important things in our lives, industries, are regulated. I've done a lot of work on the policy making in the UK, the Digital Rights and the Five Rights Foundation, which has tried to look at what would it take to structure an online world that is actually safe for our children to play in, more like a park and less like a highway interchange. So I think there's a lot of really important work to be done there. In the world that we're preparing our kids for, which, like, if I want my kid to walk to school, metaphorically speaking, like, there is a highway in between. So I need to be I can work long-term to give them a safe passage, and I have to work short-term to make sure she can look both ways, right? So talking about how to teach kids to protect themselves and think about healthy and unhealthy uses of social media, I think is one way to look at this, but it's not the only way.
So I have 4 short questions that I wanted to ask you. The first one, during this COVID lockdown, if you could give parents one piece of advice for navigating this new world order, what would it be? And then the second question is linked to that. What about for parents who have teens?
Yeah.
So can we differentiate between younger children and teens?
Yeah, sure. I think the piece of advice that I have is encapsulated in the term harm reduction, because we're just in a situation that sucks for everybody, and it's not going to be perfect. You're not going to get to perfection, or even, you might not even get to very, very good. We're trying to go for less bad and no trauma and no adverse childhood experience. So what that means, what that takes is, first of all, a parent who is sane and emotionally stable. That means you're not running yourself completely ragged, trying to be the perfect teacher, at-home teacher, the perfect housekeeper, the perfect parent, and the perfect worker, and also the perfect yourself, Instagram worthy like person, right? Who's exercising and baking bread and doing whatever it is that you're supposed to be doing. You can't do all those things perfectly. And you probably, the feeling that people express constantly is, I feel like I'm failing at everything. And so I think the solution is to lower your standards until you don't feel like you're failing at everything. Definitely kids are the priority and should be the priority, but you have to be sane and whole in order to make your kids that priority. So make of that what you will. This can mean very, very different things for different people. It could mean letting them have a little more screen time, or it could mean throwing away the screens because you need more quiet at home. So there's a vast range of what that's going to mean. For teens, I just think it's really important to understand the developmental stage that they're at is that they need their peers, and they need connections to caring adults that are not their parents. And we can't always choose the means that they're going to choose to connect to their peers, and maybe even to caring adults. They need to know that we're there for them, and we're not condemning them for this situation that's not in their control.
And so can you be a little bit more specific about that, Anya? I mean, because if you're confined at home, right, and they need that peer interaction. I mean, even us as adults, we're a little bit frustrated with this Zoom mechanism ourselves, right? Because this interview would be different if we were actually face to face. So can you talk a little bit? Can you add a little bit around that?
Yeah, I think that parents should be supportive of their kids connecting with other people in real time, whatever platform they choose to do that with. And that can go against what a lot of parenting advice has been. I mean, if it's Discord and it's a video game, that is valid. That's social connection. It's real-time connection, and kids need it. So obviously I believe in balance, and I believe in getting outside and having regular sleeping hours and all the other things I talked about. But I think that a lot of parents of teens really suffer from a lot of advice that they've gotten, that if your kid is spending 4 hours a day playing video games, you must have done something really terrible. And in this particular situation, I don't know that I agree that that's the case.
I said 4 questions, and then I'll get to some of the audience's questions. If there is one other book to read that's not yours, is there one that you would recommend? Another one that you would recommend?
In particular, let me think about that. I mean, it depends on what the need is, right?
In the sense of addressing screen time or technology and children.
Okay, technology and children. Well, The New Childhood is pretty good by Jordan Shapiro. He's like a little more radical than I am in terms of looking at history and kind of the myths that we built up. And he talks, I sort of cribbed the part from him where he talks about like screens as being something that's violating the structures of the home, and it's offering children like a path to the outside world. So I think that's pretty provocative argument.
And then my last question before I go to the audience questions. You talk a bit about educational apps and how, you know, they can be actually useful as well. So if there's one educational app to use with your child, could you give us a recommendation? I think in the book you mentioned Muse, for example. Is there the one or two apps that you would recommend to?
This is a tricky one. I mean, I kind of want to recommend a couple. Like, I think the one that we use in my home most often is probably YouTube, because for very specific things, whether that's sort of like explanations of how a black hole works, or what noise does a giraffe make, or how does the electoral college work, I think with a parent there, and that's key, you can do some great searching and you can learn a whole lot. And it also has motivated my daughter to make her own YouTube videos, which I find very fascinating. None of them we've actually put on YouTube, but she likes to edit them, which I think is great. And then, you know, the other thing is I really encourage people to use like the camera app and other things that are creative. So figuring out how to make the device a means of recording your situation and not just consuming, I think is really important. And I guess that's also with my daughter, she likes to shoot videos. So that's something that's fun for us.
So again, your emphasis is kind of guiding towards apps that really gear towards your children's interest, more than being very categorical about, you know, one app is better because it's going to help their grades or anything like that, right? I think that's
exactly. I mean, we started using a piano app that my daughter's sort of self-guided with, which is great. So I think there's
my husband tried that too, and it hasn't improved his piano, but let's put that aside. No,
your mileage may vary, that's for sure.
This is great. I'm going to try to make sure I address some of the audience's questions, because I think we have about, you know, less than 10 minutes left. So going back to impact of COVID, there's a question. Does Anya have thoughts on how remote learning due to COVID is impacting kids? I don't know if you have.
And there was this question about the failings of online schooling during the pandemic. So, you know, like the ladies in the restaurant who said this food is terrible and there's not enough of it. The problem with remote learning during the pandemic is that, number one, it's not very good, and number two, not enough kids are accessing it. So this is a very divided issue. We have this huge digital divide in our country. We have an untold number of kids who don't have consistent access on their own devices with high-speed Wi-Fi. I mean, it's estimated in the millions, a very large proportion. So there's an untold number of kids who really aren't getting meaningful instruction and have not been since March. For the kids that are engaged in remote learning, I think that we're finding that it has a lot of the, it has both the benefits and the drawbacks of remote work. So the benefits of it have to do with kids being able to get enough sleep, which is not nothing. It's been shown to be a major reason that the mental health of teenagers is not as bad as we had feared, is that they're actually getting enough sleep, which is kind of incredible. They have more control over their time and place and sort of setting as far as learning goes. I mean, this varies a lot by class, but you know, kids able to listen to music, to move around and fidget, get up and get a snack when they want, go to the bathroom, just the little things that give people autonomy and a sense of, you know, being able to have free choice, I think is not to be overlooked in terms of a benefit. A lot of kids really benefit from being able to control their sensory situation and experience when they're learning. Kids with ADD, kids again in the autism spectrum, being able to put on noise canceling headphones or just turn down the other people in the room. That's something that is kind of important. There's a big variation in how information is being presented, but there are kids who feel like they are able to work on their own pace, and they like that a lot. The drawbacks, just like with the remote work, are relationship oriented. It's hard to build relationships with kids, right? When you're just seeing them online. There's a lot of kids who are not really feeling like they have their peer support or their teacher support or the other adults in the building. There's a large number of kids with special needs who aren't getting the services that they really need in an adequate way online, which is a huge loss. We're going to see what happens as far as the academics. I think there's going to be probably some outliers who do really, really well. I don't know if there'll be a measurable percentage or better than expected. And then there will be a large number who do really badly. That's my guess.
Let's see. Oh, here's a question. Should we use screen time as a reward or not?
That's a great question. I think that everybody responds to a mixture of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. You don't want to parent totally through extrinsic rewards because it is ultimately demotivating. I see Ulrich laughing. He knows all about this. It's ultimately demotivating. It gets kids to comply for the wrong reasons. It's a little bit manipulative. But in the short term, when you're building a new habit, especially, it can be really nice to have extrinsic rewards. It helps reinforce a habit and get over that hump of resistance. So I think it's something to keep in your back pocket. That would be, don't make it the be all, don't make it the currency around your house. But it's okay once in a while.
How do you feel about parents, quote, snooping in their kids' phones' devices to see what they're up to, who they're chatting with, and what sites they're visiting?
How do you feel about husbands doing it to wives or wives doing it to husbands?
I can answer it.
Yeah.
My husband and my daughter literally can track my entire phone because I'm so inept at it. And and obviously it doesn't seem to bother me, but I mean, I literally found that my daughter was tracking where I was. So yeah, but anyway, no,
That's really
I'll just
funny.
aside to answer that question.
I think it can vary, right? And healthy relationships have a wide variation in terms of how much information people share and how they feel about it. I think that's a really good point. I bring up the question because I think that there's a sense that we should stop at nothing to keep our kids safe, but there's different kinds of safety. Yeah. And when we teach our kids that love means I know where you are, I know what you're doing, and none of your communications are hidden from me, I think that's a very dangerous message to send to our children. That's not a healthy relationship. That's not a relationship model that allows for people's autonomy or flourishing. So a model that I often recommend that I've gotten from other wise people is the break glass in case of emergency. And I'm talking here about older teens. So if you have a kid who is too young to kind of get around town on their own, right? 9 or 10 years old, you have a lot more kind of jurisdiction to get in on their conversations if it's something that you have reason to suspect that, you know, it would be helpful for an adult to be in the room. But with older kids who are having more conversations online alone, you know, without anyone really able to eavesdrop, the break class in case of emergency is like, I have your passwords, they're written down or they're in this protected doc. If something happens that seems bad or that I don't like, that your grades are falling off, you're not, you know, keeping your agreements in the house, I can break that glass and I can read what you've written and I'll have access to your texts and all the other things. So, you know, so it's sort of like the reserving the right to do it, but only for cause.
Makes sense. So I'm conscious of time. So Ulrich, you know, because I could keep going, right, Anya? This is such an interesting conversation, and I really appreciate all of your candor and the insight. But I also usually get the evil eye from Ulrich if I go over. So Ulrich, I don't know how you want to manage this. You're on mute, Ulrich.
Anya, any parting thoughts that you want to share in the last minute or two?
I mean, I just want to encourage people to, you know, trust your intuition and be willing to be flexible with the situation that all of this has presented us with. And, you know, I hope that we all are able to overcome our Zoom fatigue. I'm very impressed with all you guys for sitting in and listening this entire time. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Anya. You know, I learned a lot. I loved reading your book, and I highly recommend all the participants to definitely read your book. And again, I really appreciate your contribution during this Zoom.
Oh, and I should mention that I'm writing a new book. So
Right.
Right. So I've started to work on it. It's going to be coming out hopefully in a while. It'll be a little while. And it's about kids during the pandemic. So if anyone has a really fascinating or unusual story about their parenting experience during this time, I'm eager to hear from you. And you can hit me up on Twitter, or I guess you guys might have contact info or things to pass along.
Cool. Well, there are not that many Anya Kamenetzs out there, so you can, of course, find her and her book online. And many thanks to you, Anya. Many thanks to you, Helen. And we will be in touch with members of the audience with regard to the free books. If you don't get one, you should absolutely buy it. It's a wonderful read. And for parents and people concerned about technology, really an important message. Thanks again.
Thank you guys so much. This was a lot of fun.
Take care. Bye.